Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners.
Hi there.
It's a bit of a delay that time, Jonathan.
Sorry, I was looking at Wikipedia.
Looking at Wikipedia. And you forgot that the podcast is starting.
Hey, we're actually recording a podcast here.
You.
Well,
anyway, hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap, the podcast where we recommend some hidden gems and forgotten classics in the world of cinema to each other and to you, the listeners out there in podcast land. My name's David Seeley, and this fine young gentleman across from me virtually is Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Hello, Jonathan. How are you doing?
Yep, I'm very well, thank you.
So, Jonathan, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? The frostbite or the verbal?
Well, good question. It's going to be the theme. That reference went.
Oh, did they? Oh, well, seeing that that's from one of the films that we're talking about tonight.
I was taking notes. Actually.
Perhaps it would strike more of a chord with you if you were hanging upside down in a meat freezer.
Yes, that would definitely strike a chord with me. So the theme tonight is A Star is Born. And what that means is that this is the first film of a future star, movie star, or maybe a couple of, or maybe it's the film that sort of took a sort of an actor from sort of into the big time.
The breakthrough, they would say, the breakthrough
film. Thank you very much. Exactly. So that's the idea for tonight.
What an awesome theme, actually. And there's so many examples we could have chosen, but I think tonight we've chosen a couple of really, really cool films to talk about.
So cool.
Yeah.
So cool.
How about you? You want to go first? You want to tell us what film you chose tonight?
Yes. Well, I chose a film I first saw when it came out back in, I think it was 2001 or maybe 99. It was Ghost World.
Oh.
And directed by Terry Zwigoff and from a screenplay by Daniel Clowes. And it's based on his graphic novel. And the star who was born in this film is Scarlett Johansson.
Oh, lovely.
Yep.
Lovely.
She's
Black Widow herself.
Very different Scarlett to the Scarlett we know now, the sort of one of the biggest movie stars in the world.
Yes.
And
apparently, Jonathan, according to Wikipedia, she is the highest grossing box office star of all time.
Crikey.
Isn't that amazing?
That's crazy.
I did not know that because, I would have thought someone like Tom Cruise or, I don't know, Mel Gibson or somebody like that was in the leagues there. But apparently, she is the highest grossing box office star of all time.
Well, that's extraordinary. And I'm pretty sure Ghost World wasn't one of those films that contributed to that immense revenue that she generated. No. Despite it being an excellent film and it actually being nominated for the Best Adapted Screenplay at the Oscars. But still.
Well, I'm going to lay my cards on the table here, Jonathan. I absolutely love Ghost World. And when you texted me to tell me that was a film you wanted to propose for our show today, I was ecstatic.
Copper hoop.
I was indeed. I was as giddy as a schoolgirl. Very excited because I absolutely love this film. I think it's brilliant. And we can talk a bit more in depth about that a little bit later.
Yeah, you've watched it again?
Yes, absolutely. And I'd happily watch it again right this minute. Well, maybe not, because I just watched it last night. So maybe not. But I do very much love it. Did you want to ask me what my film was?
So, yes, I was going to ask you that, of course. David, what is the film that you've chosen as A Star is Born?
Oh, well, you know what? I've cheated a little bit in that the film that I picked isn't actually this particular actor's first film, but there's a bonus first film actor in it, and actually a very, very big star. Both of them are. But the film I chose is called The Long Good Friday from 1980. It was a handmade film, which was George Harrison's film production company that was involved in the production of this. And it is a film that essentially, not only was it the big breakthrough role for the late, great Bob Hoskins, one of the great stars of the 80s and 90s from Britain, but also it was the actual very first film, although he has a fairly small role in it. And I'm not even sure he actually says anything in it. Does he? I think he might say one or two.
Doesn't say
He
much.
definitely does not say
Certainly doesn't
much.
say much.
But anyway, it is the very first film appearance of a young actor at the time named Pierce Brosnan, who of course went on to become
Mr. Bond.
fifth? Was it the fifth or the sixth James Bond? I think it'd be the fifth.
Yeah.
Yeah, am I right? I'm not a big, huge James Bond mega fan or anything, but
I think he might be the
fourth or the fifth.
Oh no, fifth.
He
fifth,
was
you're right,
fifth,
because there was that one who only did one. Yeah.
I think he was meant to be the fourth, but because he was tied up in his commitments to a television series that he was doing in America at the time, he had to pass on it, and that's how Timothy Dalton ended up becoming the new James Bond. And then when Timothy Dalton left the series, and Pierce Brosnan then took it over. Isn't that what happened?
Okay, yeah. I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, and before we go off on a tangent, this podcast is not about James Bond, except of course Pierce Brosnan, who was James Bond, famously. He's in one of the films we're talking about tonight. So
maybe we'll have another episode later. A Bond is Born.
Sure.
Where we choose a Bond film.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah. The sky's the limit. We got no rules on this podcast about themes and ideas for different shows. So James Bond might be in the future. Who knows?
Exactly. Who knows? Anything's possible.
Anything is possible. So anyway, my film is, in fact, the classic British gangster film called The Long Good Friday. It came out in 1980, and it did, in fact, make an international star out of the late, great Bob Hoskins. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that in a few minutes. But first...
Yeah, I would say, actually, it certainly contributed to the starry quality of one of the other actors in it, Helen Mirren. Must have contributed to her ascent to the first rank of British
absolutely.
talent.
I mean, I think at that time she was a fairly sort of relatively well-known face in sort of British kind of films and television and stuff. Because she goes way back, doesn't she?
Yep. Her first film, 1966.
Gosh. So she must have been quite young at that stage, but she's definitely had been around for a while and was kind of like a relatively established figure in Britain anyway, but perhaps maybe not internationally so much. So you're right. No. This probably was a film that helped contribute to her stardom as well. So anyway, both of these films are awesome. This is the point in the podcast where we pretend we haven't watched them yet and we go away for a very brief break. So let's do that now. We're going to go away and pretend like we haven't watched the films yet. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about them. So stay tuned, listeners.
Yes.
Listeners.
That's good.
And we're back.
We're back.
We're back. Whoa, what a great couple of films.
Yeah, two terrific films that I hadn't seen for a long, long time.
No. So, Jonathan, I think last time we ended up going kind of chronologically, so shall we stick with that?
Let's stick with it tonight. We might change it around later, but let's stick to the chronological approach. Yeah, tonight.
Okay. So The Long Good Friday, as I mentioned before, came out in 1980.
Yes.
which is a good sort of 2 decades before Ghost World came out. So there's a bit of a stretch between them.
Yeah.
So we'll start with The Long Good Friday. So as I mentioned, this is a gangster film. And I think this was at a time when maybe there wasn't quite so many British gangster films.
No.
I think, if anything, this film could perhaps be credited for sort of starting that genre, if you will, or that sort of move towards more sort of gangster
Yeah.
themed kind of films.
Definitely.
And as I said, it was kind of co-produced by George Harrison's company, Handmade Films, along with, I believe, Lou Grade's ITC had a hand in the financing of this film.
Right.
It was directed by a man named John Mackenzie, who
Yes.
I don't know what do his credits include, Jonathan? Do you?
Well, the only film I'd seen of his is The Honorary Consul.
Oh yeah,
which was released in 1983. I think in America it was Beyond the Limit, and that actually stars. It's set in Central America or South America. It's quite a political film. It's based on a Graham Greene novel, and it stars Richard Gere, but also Pierce Brosnan. So yeah, and it was actually I think I saw it sort of in the decade it came out. Let's put it like that. And I really enjoyed it then. A really good film. And he made The Fourth Protocol, which is a adaptation of a Frederick Forsyth novel. I read the book when sort of back then, and I really enjoyed the book. And I think I saw the film. I think it was all right. And those are actually the Honorary Consul is the only one I've seen of his films. But
and Ruby, which was the film about Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh, really?
The one with Danny Aiello. It's like that was quite a big film at the time, and he did a few other films in America in the kind of 90s and early 2000s. Sadly, he's no longer with us.
He's no longer with us.
2011.
Yeah, from a stroke. Interestingly, he made one film in the early 70s called Unman, Wittering and Zygo, surely one of the most sort of unlikely film titles around. But it does have a very interesting plot. A new teacher arrives at the school and begins to suspect his predecessor was murdered by the pupils, though his suspicions are written off as paranoia. And he sets out to prevent the same fate befalling him. That sounds quite interesting, doesn't it?
Well, it does indeed. Perhaps we should look that out and have a look, because I've never heard of that one. It definitely sounds interesting.
Yep.
Cool. Well, so he was someone who had a fairly long and successful career. He made films over here in England, and then went over to America at the end of his career and made some quite high-profile projects there. So. Again, probably off the back of this film, I would assume, because this obviously was quite a big film at the time. I think it was quite successful in Britain, and then was released over in America the following year. There's quite an interesting story about how George Harrison bought out the other partners in the film to regain all the rights, because he wanted to stop it being shown on television in an edited form.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so because apparently there was a screening scheduled in March of 1981 on ITV, but they had prepared a severely edited version of the film, presumably cut for content, like the coarse language and the violence and things.
Right.
Being a gangster film, there's quite a bit of both. But apparently George Harrison was so incensed by the cuts and the alterations to the film that he actually bought out the film altogether just to stop that transmission on television from happening.
Wow. So, well, I suppose you can do that when you're a Beatle.
Yes, absolutely. I would imagine he was in a position to do that, luckily. And I'm sure it probably didn't harm him too much financially either, because the film was a great success. I even remember it. I mean, in 1980, I would have been a fairly young man, but I have quite good memories of when this film came out and all the buzz and discussion around it. So it was quite a big film.
Even on the other side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it looks like it came out the following year in America, which might explain why I kind of remember it. The film was made. Amazingly enough, the budget was only £930,000. So
Right.
from a kind of a big budget Hollywood standard, that's quite a modest budget.
Yeah.
It was produced originally. The screenplay was called The Paddy Factor, and when you see the film, you as it progresses, you would learn what significance the Paddy Factor would has in the plot. But I can also understand why the film didn't end up being released under that title, because
Definitely.
for
That's very much a working title.
yes, for various
Oh my
reasons, I would
goodness.
imagine that title might not have done it any favors. Um,
Oh my
but
goodness.
do you know? Are you familiar with Lou Grade in ITC? I mean,
Not as much as you. I mean, I remember he was a sort of figure when I was sort of growing up. He always had a cigar.
yeah,
He was like a sort of British version of a Hollywood mogul,
he
basically.
was indeed. He was a very wealthy man who produced television. He's predominantly famous for producing television series, and many of them went on to achieve cult status. I'm a big fan of the ITC shows, actually, but the most
Right.
famous one, obviously, would be The Saint with Roger Moore, and
Oh,
the
yes.
the Danger Man, and then which morphed into The Prisoner
Okay.
with Patrick McGowan. But he was and the original Robin Hood TV series, the one with Richard Green, The Adventures of Robin Hood, which I
Yeah.
have that series on DVD and I love it. It's I still go back. It's great comfort food for me to go back and watch those old Robin Hood shows. It's just a really wonderful, fun TV show to watch. Uh,
Yeah.
and but Lou Grade made all kinds of really, classic cult TV shows like Randall and Hopkirk Deceased and Department S and all those kind of. They were all fairly short lived because in Britain
Yeah.
they don't tend to make, they don't tend to drag shows on and make hundreds and hundreds of episodes. They kind of do a batch and then they kind of say, okay, that's enough. Let's move on to something else. And
Yeah.
also, Lou Grade would have been responsible for the Jerry Anderson shows like Thunderbirds and Stingray and
Yes.
Captain Scarlet and the Mysterions and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
Lou Grade was quite a pivotal figure in the kind of British entertainment industry in the 60s and 70s. In the 70s,
Yeah.
he did move away from television and he started getting into film production. And in the end, that kind of broke him because he spent lavish amounts of money on the big, huge, major film productions with big stars in them. I guess to name a few things like Raise the Titanic and a couple other things
Yes.
like that were huge, really big, expensive blockbuster productions that actually
Yeah.
kind of didn't perform very well financially. Like they kind of lost loads of money and were not particularly
Okay.
successful. So in the end, he kind of got ousted from ITC. And his career kind of fizzled out, but he was quite a pivotal
All right.
figure, and it's quite interesting because until I was researching, preparing for the episode tonight, I wasn't aware that Lou Grade was involved in the Long Good Friday at all. So that was kind of an
No,
interesting factoid. Uh,
that's good. Yeah.
so anyway, the film, I guess, just very trying not to spoil too much, but basically the basic plot line of the film is that Bob Hoskins' character, he's kind of a very successful gangster in London, and he kind of runs kind of rackets, and he's in property businesses and stuff like that, and he's for I guess they imply a good 10 years or so, he's more or less been the top kingpin in the kind of criminal underworld in London. But he's trying to
Yeah.
legitimize himself, and he wants to start a big property development down in the, where was it, kind of in the Docklands,
Docklands.
uh,
Yeah.
down in London, and he's trying to entice some partners from America to come and invest in this project. And he's
They're not just partners, though, are they? They're
they are
mafiosi.
indeed, yes. They're kind of members of the American criminal underworld, and he's trying to sort of bring them
Yeah.
in on a big deal that will redevelop this area in London with hotels and I don't know, resorts or whatever it is that they're planning to do. But it's like a big deal, and it's going to be his way to sort of launder all his kind of criminally gained proceeds and become kind of a legitimate
Mm.
businessman. And but then what happens is these chaps have come over to visit and kind of talk a deal with him, in London. They've come over from the States, and the main chap is played by the late great Eddie Constantine, who was quite a famous American actor and singer who he basically moved over from America to France in the kind of late 50s or 60s, and because his career hadn't been going very well, and he kind of reestablished himself as a celebrity in France. And I think,
Really? I had no
most
idea.
sort of diehard film fans will remember him most from Jean-Luc Godard's Alphaville. He was the main star of that. And so
Is
he's
he?
quite,
Okay. I have seen that
yeah,
a
but
long time
he's
ago.
worked in all kinds of, with some of the great directors. He worked with Fassbinder and Agnes Varda and all sorts. He was in all sorts of films for them. So he's quite a
Wow.
recognizable face in sort of kind of world cinema. Um,
Right.
but he comes over with his kind of shady, lawyer, and they come over to do this deal.
Yeah.
But then some bad things start to happen. Some of Bob Hoskins' crew, his sort of right hand man and stuff, get murdered, and there's some bombs that get set off in some of his nightclubs that he owns, and there seems to be this concerted effort to undermine him and sabotage him when he has these big American
Yeah.
guys coming over to do this deal with him. So the film is basically predominantly takes place on this Good Friday when they're
Yeah.
entertaining this American chap, and all these things start to go wrong. And so Bob Hoskins is going frantically going around the London underworld trying to find out who it is who's pulling these hits and things on him and his organization. So that is essentially
Yeah.
the story behind the film. And as it progresses, obviously we find out what's been going on and who's doing these things, and it kind of builds up to a searing and exciting climax.
From the very beginning, you've got this extremely pacey bit of sort of film, which is maybe 5 minutes, and there's barely any dialogue at all. You're completely gripped from the very beginning, and terrific. And one of the funny things about the film is, because you mentioned earlier that you've got all this sort of background on American and North American and Canadian films and actors. So this one is full of sort of British TV talent, basically, which I suppose American viewers might not be quite as aware of. And one of the key characters is this guy, basically Charlie from Casualty, and he's Bob Hoskins, the or Harold Chan's sort of sidekick. And then there's other characters from a chap from Brushstrokes, which is a sort of sitcom in the 80s. Somebody from Only Fools and Horses. Gillian Tailforth, who was later in EastEnders, the big sort of BBC soap opera. And just sort of absolutely littered with these sort of recognisable people who later became recognisable, at least. But I guess just before they made their names in those shows.
It's brilliant, quite great to watch all these films, and it's fun to kind of spot the face and kind of go, oh, there's that guy who later was went on to be in that show or in that film. But the main thing that Long Good Friday did was establish Bob Hoskins, who I think up to that point was predominantly known as a theater actor, and I think he'd done a few sort of bits and bobs for television, and I think most famously he was in a television production of Pennies from Heaven, which was kind of a Depression era musical that was quite famous, and later on it was made into a film starring Steve Martin a few years after The Long Good Friday came out, I think. And again, I think that film's been largely forgotten, unfortunately, as well, but it's very, very good. It's got Jessica Harper in it as well, and a few others. But Bob Hoskins starred in the television version for British TV a few years prior to this. And apparently The Long Good Friday was written with him in mind. So I think the producers and the director all kind of said, we want Bob Hoskins. And there's an interesting story on the Blu-ray that I watched the film on a Blu-ray, and there was an accompanying documentary about the making of the film. And Bob Hoskins tells a really interesting story on it about how he had just finished making a film called Zulu Dawn, which was kind of a it was kind of a like a
Yes, I've heard about it.
prequel film to Zulu, the original film that kind of made. If we're talking about
Yeah,
famous first films, that's kind of the one that made Michael Caine. Oh my God, I can't believe I
Michael
forgot his
Caine.
name. But Michael Caine was made famous firstly in a film called Zulu, and years later they made kind of a prequel that had, I think, Peter O'Toole and a few other famous people in it, which I can't remember off the top of my head because it's been a long time since I've seen it, and it's
Yeah,
actually not really that good. But Bob Hoskins is apparently in it, and I didn't even know that. But
right.
apparently, while they were filming that film in Africa, Bob
Yeah.
Hoskins contracted a tapeworm
Okay.
because he ate some raw meat as in part of some sort of a ritual thing that he had taken. He was invited to participate in something, and it involved eating some raw meat, and he contracted a tapeworm, as luck would
Right.
have it. And so when he was back in Britain, he ended up hospitalized from this tapeworm, and they apparently had quite a bit of difficulty getting it out of his system. And
Oh
so
goodness.
eventually he had to have surgery to have it removed.
Whoa.
Yeah, so that's quite an interesting story in and of itself. Apparently, he said it was like 40 feet long or something in the end, and they
Oh.
had to have it. They had to surgically go in and have it removed. So at the time, he was quite ill, and they approached him to do this movie, and they said, "Bob, you got to do this movie. We really want you for this. You're perfect for this." But he was ill, and he was kind of like, but he read it, and he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it."
Yeah.
But apparently, he lost loads of weight, and he wasn't, feeling too great. But
Yeah.
but he agreed to do this film anyway, and he's just dynamite in it. You can actually understand how this kind of established his stardom and his
Yeah.
career because he's just absolutely electrifying in this picture,
He
isn't
really
he?
is. Yeah.
Just riveting every time he's on screen, and you can,
Yeah.
the looks on his face. He does so much acting just in his face and in his body, just in the tension and things that you can see in him, and he just has that great voice. And when he gets angry, you can really he can be quite frightening, but at the same time, he can come across as being quite vulnerable and kind of gentle and things as well. So he,
Yeah.
he has an
It's
amazing kind of physical presence, I think, because he's kind of small and stocky, and he's just
yeah.
got this face, doesn't he, that just really lends itself to, he's the kind of guy you believe in this. He's kind of like a good, loyal guy who people look up to and respect and like, but at the same time, maybe they're a little bit scared of him as well.
Yes, exactly. So is this the film that got him the role in Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Do you think?
Well, I think Roger Rabbit was a bit like a few years after this. I think he went on after this. He did a film called Mona Lisa, the Neil Jordan film, where he
Okay.
played the cab driver. And I think it was kind of that 1-2 punch because from what I remember at the time, this film came out first, and then Mona Lisa was just maybe a year or two after that. I can't remember exactly when
Right.
that
Yeah.
came
Two
out.
years.
Yeah, and it was kind of that 1-2 punch. This film and then Mona Lisa, which really sort of made Bob Hoskins he was the guy, wasn't he? And then that's
Yeah.
when he started doing a lot of American films, including the Roger Rabbit. Yeah,
Yes. Because that's when I first sort of heard about him. I guess in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. That's when he. I mean, that was a big film that year.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, and he's brilliant in that as well. I mean, it must
yeah.
have been quite a because he basically plays the whole film against cartoon characters who weren't there. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Amazing.
so it takes, I think, quite a great talent to pull something like that off, to be able to basically, you know, do pratfalls and jump around and talk to things that aren't there.
Yeah.
So
And he made a very convincing American as well,
yeah,
considering he
absolutely.
was a
He's
Brit.
great with the accents. Um, So yeah, and sadly, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, didn't he? He, I think, was it
Yeah. He
Parkinson's
had
disease?
Parkinson's, I think.
And he kind of announced his retirement, and then sadly, about kind of a year later, he actually passed away. And I remember when I heard the news, I felt really quite sad by that one because he was a really when I was growing up, he was quite a major sort of predominant character actor in films during that time and in the kind of 80s and 90s. And So I had a lot of time for him. He was a really great actor,
Definitely.
and
He was.
sad to hear that he was gone. Um,
Yeah, very much.
and as we mentioned too, this was Pierce Brosnan's first film. It is a very small role. He's basically he's a temptress, isn't he? he's
He is a temptress,
he's
yeah.
used to lure, and again, because we're conscious of we try very hard because we're recommending films to our listeners and trying to tell people, hey, go and watch this film. So we don't want to spoil too many of the
Not
details.
too much, no. Not too many spoilers.
But we'll just say that Pierce Brosnan, who's obviously a very, he's a good looking chap, isn't he?
He's a good-looking
And
chap.
in this film, that he was quite young. Apparently, he was only 25 when this film was made, and
Right.
he's used as a temptress because there's a character in the film, a gay character who is lured to his doom by the boyish good looks of Pierce
Both good
Brosnan.
looks.
So that's all I'll say. But that's not much of a spoiler because that's very, very early in the film, isn't it?
It
Yeah.
is quite
So
early in the
it is
film, yeah,
actually one of the
exactly.
impetuses that event is one of the things that sets off the story, really. So it's kind of one of the things that sets up the story. So,
Yes.
um, so I don't think that's much of a spoiler. And
No, it's
he
not.
does reemerge later on in the film as in quite a couple of pivotal moments in the film
Yep.
where his character uh, uh, comes back into the story. So, um, was there anything else you wanted to say about Long Good Friday?
Well, I mean, I suppose I could probably go on all night about it, but it has some great dialogue. I think one of the things I would like to say is that it's, I think, a big influence on Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and the sort of whole oeuvre of Guy
Mm,
Ritchie, all his stuff. In fact, it has, I think, at least one actor who's in Lock, Stock as well, and maybe Snatch,
okay.
one of his sort of his Guy Ritchie's gangster
Yeah.
films. It's got some great sort of Cockney dialogue in it. There's one point Bob Hoskins' character Harold Chan says, "Get on the trumpet,"
Yes.
which I haven't heard before, but we all know what he's talking about. Um, and I also little factoid which is quite fun is that it's all basically that it's all about developing Docklands. So Docklands is the docks of London. At one stage, in fact, in the 1940s, it was the largest port in the world. Can you
Mm,
believe it? And but by the sort of the 70s, it had become sort of superseded by container ships that were landing on the coast rather than sailing down the Thames. So you had this immense sort of amount of prime real estate ready for development, and so that all the warehouses were still there, but they weren't really being used. And so it's very interesting if you're a Londoner or if you've been to London to see this place, this area that's now full of sort of flats and offices and things like that, and what it used to look like, all these old warehouses. But from a film lover's point of view, it also has an interesting connection because 5 years later, Stanley Kubrick made Full Metal Jacket, and the second half of which, because he filmed the whole film in the UK, of course, and the second half of which is meant to be set in Vietnam, but it's all filmed in the sort of semi-destroyed
mm,
docklands before they built the flats. But they knocked down the warehouses, but they hadn't built the flats and offices yet. And so this same sort of area became a location for two great
wow.
films, which is quite an interesting factoid. And so, and it also has some great sort of interesting camera shots. So there's one bit where some people, it's not giving too much away, people are sort of
Mm,
dangled. And so the camera is sort of underneath them as they're being dangled, which is sort of unusual and sort of disorientating sort of camera angle, I suppose. And then there's another bit where somebody's killed. I won't give away who it is, but it's the implement that kills them. The sort of the camera's sort of right at the end of this implement as it sort of goes towards them, which is also quite a sort of interesting and rather sort of horrifying use of the camera work there. And yeah, I mean, what a great film.
You mentioned about I mean, it was quite predictive of the Docklands developments, wasn't it? Because I don't know if at the time there was any talk about what they were going to do with those areas, but in the film, that's his big idea, isn't it? He's like, that I'm going to take this area and I'm going to tear it all down and rebuild something really great here. And so there was a little.
Well, I guess they must have known. I mean, that must have been in the air that the plans were there. And interestingly, he says it's all going to come together for the 1988 Olympics.
Yeah.
But I suppose London did get its Olympics, but they had to wait another couple of decades, or 2.5 decades actually, pretty much, for the Olympics. And it didn't happen, but it did happen in another sort of former industrial area, sort of in East London. Which I suppose is sort of accurate.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because that's one of the great things I like about he's a man with big ideas, and I'm going to take, I'm going to make Britain great, and I'm going to build this thing into the biggest thing. And he's, there's a certain kind of arrogance about him as well, isn't there? That kind of plays out through the course of the film. That makes it quite interesting.
Yeah, well, the sort of political or role of Britain in this. I mean, it's sort of just one of the sort of many threads. But he's got this there's this sort of European dimension, and he says, "I'm a businessman with a sense of history," and he talks about the future being a link to Europe, and he mentions it a few times actually, both especially to the Americans, and. And you sort of think, we're part of a common market, he says as well.
Yeah, and it's all brilliant because how things kind of turned around, didn't it? And now it's kind of gone back the other way, that Britain's kind of leaned back more the other way. But it is quite interesting to see it in that historical context. It makes it all the more, it adds just that other layer of really fascinating layer to it that was really amazing. And I love you mentioned about all that, because it's shot in and around London, and it's so fascinating just to see the different parts of London, and to see, I love it in old films that are shot on location, and you can see those, different areas of London, the different buildings and stuff, and how it's changed, and also how it stayed the same. Like there's a great moment near the beginning when they're offloading a coffin off a train at, I think it's Paddington Station, isn't it? At first I thought it was Waterloo.
I think it is.
And I went, "Oh, that's Waterloo Station," because I go through there every morning. But it's actually Paddington Station. But it's quite fascinating when you see those things in these old films. This is from 1980, which is sort of 40 odd years ago. This would have been made. Yet you can sort of recognize these areas and go, "Oh, that's this." That you go through every day, or that you've seen all the time, or very often. And you can kind of say, "Oh, it looks really similar," or, "Well, that building's not there anymore, that bit's not there anymore, but that still looks the same." And I love that.
Well, London looks a lot sort of grubbier, I guess. They hadn't cleaned all the soot off, which they started doing in the sort of 90s, I think, scrubbing up all the buildings. One other thing that I really liked, there's one bit where Helen Mirren and I think it is Jeff, who's his sidekick, played by Derek Thompson, who's Charlie in Casualty, and they sort of drive past St Paul's Cathedral, which is, of course, one of London's sort of big landmarks. But the nice thing is the camera, and they're in a sort of open-top car. And the nice thing is the camera angle stays quite sort of close on them in the car, and you never see the dome of St Paul's, which is I just thought it was brilliant. Somehow it would be, I don't know, it's just not showing London in a sort of tourist view, which I guess that's the whole film. It's not exactly a tourist view.
And that is an interesting thing you mentioned when you see a lot of films of sort of the late 60s, 70s, and sort of 80s set in Britain, that there is that kind of gray, grubby, sort of grimy look to the city. That it's not. Well, I mean, some parts of it are still a bit like that, but it is sort of not quite like that anymore, is it? Uh,
No,
you mentioned too
no,
about the
definitely.
Cockney, like the really thick Cockney accents and some of the dialogue and stuff. Again, to go back to the Blu-ray, there's an interesting little featurette on it because apparently when the film was distributed in America, there was 5 scenes that they re-recorded the dialogue. They changed it because they probably
Really?
quite rightly thought that American audiences wouldn't understand the references and the dialogue. So they basically re-recorded little
Okay.
bits, and they have a little featurette where they compare the scenes. They kind of, because obviously the version that's on the Blu-ray is the original British version of the film. But they have this little thing where they take
Right.
the scenes and they say this is what it was like in the British version and this is what it was like in the American version, and they kind of compare them, and they just make these little subtle changes to the dialogue so that American audiences wouldn't be like going,
Ha,
what are they talking about? What's that mean? Kind of thing. So I thought that was quite
right,
interesting as
right.
well. So. So yeah,
Ha.
definitely.
But
If you want to see the film, I don't know how did you watch it, John? Did you?
I watched it on YouTube again.
Oh,
I
okay.
paid, I think it was 1.99 to
Oh,
rent it.
bargain.
Yeah, it was a
That's
bargain. It was a bargain.
that
That
is
was
a
the sort of
bargain.
low quality, but I mean, it was fine. I didn't
Oh,
notice it
great.
was low quality. It seemed fine as far as I was concerned. You can get a high quality version, or you can buy it for I think £5 or £6 or something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I like I said, I have the Blu-ray the from Arrow Video, and it's been out for quite a long time, so I think you could probably pick it up fairly cheaply. And it does, aside from the film, which is a really nice remaster. It's got, like I said, some interesting. It's got like a making of documentary where they talk to all the principal creative people involved in the actors and things that were in it, and have lots of interviews and stuff.
Right.
And they've got a couple of other little featurettes and things of interest to give a little bit of context to the film. So again, that's worth picking up. And I'm pretty sure, like Arrow Video, some of their older titles, you can usually pick them up for sort of under a tenner, usually if you keep your eyes out. So definitely worth picking up because it's such a great film, and it's the kind of thing you're going to watch every once in a while. You're going to go back and watch it. So
Definitely. Well, I
so
watched it with Autumn, and she loved it as well. She thought it was great film.
yeah, you can't go wrong, folks. It's called the Long Good Friday. So however you consume your films, um, go out and find it because it's definitely worth checking out.
It is.
Um,
And if you have
and
seen it
just
before, revisit it. It's worth a revisit too.
For the benefit of our North American listeners, and actually, can I say we have a few European and listeners in Russia as well, which I was quite surprised to learn. So, greetings to everyone out there, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome,
Absolutely.
and
Hello, world.
yes, hello world. But I would just thought I would mention that Casualty, for those people who don't know, Jonathan's referenced it a couple times. That is a British BBC kind of. Is it a daytime one, that one,
No,
or
it's
is
not.
that?
It's evening. It's like ER.
Is it?
It's a British ER.
Yeah, it's like the British version of ER, but it's like a soap opera, isn't it? It's like
Yeah,
it's like a recurring show. They
yeah.
don't.
It's been
It
running
isn't
since
done
about
in seasons.
1989
It's
or
like
something.
it's an ongoing kind of serial. Is it still on, Jonathan, or have
I
they
think it is.
axed it?
I don't know if it's on. I think it is. I think it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, I don't know, but I just thought I'd mention that because there might be, because I would imagine that outside of Britain, probably Casualty. I mean, I could be wrong on this. I'm just assuming that people outside of the UK might not know what Casualty is. So I just thought I would clarify that.
It is. It is still running,
Is it?
and I believe, and it started in 1986. Can you believe it?
Wow. And what is that? Is that like a Saturday night one, Sunday night one?
Yeah, I think it's Saturday night. Yeah.
Yeah. It's on like every Saturday night, and it's kind of, if you like that sort of thing, it's out there. But I don't know if people outside of the UK would have access to that show anyway. So.
No, I don't know.
What isn't one of the main stars of that? He's the guy who was in The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, really?
I'm trying to think of his name. I can't think of his name right now.
Okay.
I don't know if he's still on it. Sorry, we don't want to go on too much.
Let's get back on track. Shall we move over to Ghost World?
Yes, absolutely, Ghost World.
Right.
So did you want to introduce that one, Jonathan? Because that was your pick this week.
Yeah. So Ghost World, I saw when it came out in 2001. It is a sort of comedy, and as I mentioned earlier, directed by Terry Zwigoff from this graphic novel by Daniel Clowes, who also wrote a screenplay for it. And it's basically about these two girls, sort of, I guess teenagers. They just it finishes on their sort of graduation night, and they leave high school, and they don't really know what they're going to do, but they're going to get jobs and they're going to get a flat together. And their sort of their common sort of interest, as it were, what brings them together is they're both sort of disaffected. They're too cool for school. They're actually, luckily, they don't have to go to school anymore. But when they were at school, they were a bit too cool for it.
And these aren't even hipsters. These are the ones who are like even mock the hipsters and even the cool kids and stuff, aren't they?
They are so cool.
They're the outsiders. They're
outsiders is what they are.
Who kind of mock and ridicule everyone and everything, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's two of them, and one of them is Enid, who's played by Thora Birch, and the other one is Rebecca, who's played by Scarlett Johansson. And I believe she was a teenager at the time. She was, I think, 16 or 17 when the film was made. And Thora Birch was a bit older. She's a couple of years older than Scarlett Johansson. And so when they leave school, old Enid is sort of the more responsible one, and she has a job in a coffee shop, and whereas that's Rebecca, who is Scarlett Johansson's character, has a job in a coffee shop, whereas Rebecca doesn't have a job, or when she gets sort of fired for being sort of too cool, basically. But one thing she does have to do is that she has to retake her art. So she passed all her exams except for art, which is sort of ludicrous because the one thing we know she's good at is art. She's an amazing at drawing, because you see her sketchbooks, which it looks like they were all done by Daniel Clowes himself.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
And she has to go to these sort of art classes sort of periodically or on a weekly basis, and they're rather amusing as well. And really the beginning bit of the film is they're very cool, and then just a sort of stream of American eccentrics, and it's very, very funny, and everybody's very odd and peculiar, I would say. But as the story as the film proceeds, a sort of story emerges out of it about their relationship, and they sort of basically encounter this guy who's Steve Buscemi, called Seymour, and Seymour is a collector of old sort of 78s jazz, or really sort of blues and sort of maybe obscure 78 music. And they sort of slightly first they don't take pity on him. First they just ridicule him. Then they start to take pity on him, and then they sort of form a relationship with him. Or at least Enid does. And it's the film sort of almost as much about him as it is about those two. But really, it turns out that Enid is the star of the show. Thora Birch rather than in my memory, I had it as Scarlett Johansson playing quite an important role in the film. Well, being really quite an important character, but watching it again, I thought, okay, she's not quite as important as I remembered.
She is almost kind of a supporting character in the overall story.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
the two of them are kind of, in a sense, cast adrift when high school ends. Suddenly they are left grasping for their identity and what, finding
Exactly.
some direction in what they're going to do with their lives.
It's a
And
coming of age
Scarlett
story.
Johansson's character has at least some plan
Yeah.
of what she'd like to do, whereas the Enid isn't quite so sure that that's really what she wants to do. She is completely kind of cast adrift, isn't she,
Yeah.
and trying to figure out what direction she's going to go in and what her place is.
Yeah, well, she has two problems. One is that she's very talented, whereas I guess Scarlett Johansson's character may be talented, but we're not really introduced to what her sort of particular talents are. But definitely we can see that Enid is very talented, and that sort of means that she has to sort of use her talents. But the other problem she encounters is that basically nobody gives a monkeys about the fact that she's this amazing artist. And when she goes to the art class, whenever she shows her pictures, they just look at them. I mean, these are extraordinarily skillful pictures, and the art teacher just sort of is utterly contemptuous of them. And whereas,
she's quite surrounded by sort of the other characters are portrayed, at least, as quite banal and quite not really particularly creative or independent thinkers, very much like she is.
Yeah.
So she is very much an outsider in that environment, and she's in a situation where the others couldn't possibly appreciate her on that level, she's just in a completely different headspace than they are.
Yeah.
So it is a kind of very much her alienation from those other people around her, which is a real crux of what the story's kind of about, isn't it?
It is, and I guess what part of it is that they, one of the sort of small points is that Daniel Clowes seems to be saying that the good old-fashioned craftsmanship of drawing is neglected in modern-day America compared to the more sensational sort of found objects and sort of installation art and all this sort of stuff, which is just a bit easy, frankly. And if you can
you can kind of put anything you want on it and say that that's what it is, rather, you know what I mean? It's kind of easy to just make a big jumble of wires and then say it means this.
Exactly.
So it's quite funny. I mean, the film spends a lot of time, and I can't say that it pokes gentle fun at the sort of the kind of banalities of everyday life and the sort of the conformity and the peculiarities of various individuals. And it's kind of this weird sort of push and pull that the film has, because on one side it's kind of making fun of these different things. I mean, there's those great moments at the beginning during the graduation ceremony where they're kind of, they're the ones standing off in the corner, sort of tittering and mocking and making fun of all these kids who are being ridiculous and saying silly things.
Yeah.
But there's at times a bit of mean-spiritedness about it as well. Like there are times when they see people in public in a restaurant and they'll kind of say really kind of somewhat quite nasty things.
Yes.
And even when they meet Seymour, the way that they meet him is they kind of set him up and play a practical joke on him. And it is quite a cruel thing that they do to him.
They definitely do.
And they just sit off in the corner going, look at him, he's so ridiculous, kind of, so there's a bit of, that element to it too. And as the film progresses, you can see how that kind of alienates the girls from others,
Yeah.
or at least Enid's character perhaps more than Scarlett Johansson's character, because her character, in a sense, seems to be willing to conform and to try and fit in and do what she needs to do to
Yeah.
reach her goals, whereas Enid just really struggles to try and incorporate her worldview into and find some meaningful way that she can start to progress in society, because she
Yes.
feels so alienated from it.
Yeah. And at some points, I started to think that this sort of film's slightly about sort of depression, really, because she sort of ends up, and where at the beginning she's sort of cool and aloof and cynical and alienated, by the end, that alienation sort of morphed into something that's really not very healthy at all. And you can see that, and the ending is, it's a very sort of interesting, well, it's an interesting ending, I thought. There's a couple of different interpretations one could make, at least a couple.
Yes, it's a highly sort of enigmatic ending, isn't it? Because and even like when I was watching it last night, I kind of picked up a different interpretation than I perhaps have in the past when I've watched it, because in the past I watched it and kind of felt it was a bit more of a positive kind of ending, that kind of, you know, and again, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the film, but I guess this time my reading of it was a bit different, because I picked up on things in it, and so I kind of interpreted the ending as a little bit more downbeat than I had in the past.
I think it could be the positive or negative, definitely. It's
definitely, and I mean, and I think that's one of the great things about it, because it's kind of this quite enigmatic ending, and you could interpret it any number of ways, and that's what really makes it interesting.
Yeah, two films that sort of came to mind whilst watching it. One is of course, Drugstore Cowboy, one of the first films, earlier films that we looked at.
That's from episode 2, listeners, if you want to go back and check that out. Cinematic Substance Abuse, it's called.
Yeah, because I think this film's, it's not really specific about where it is, but it's basically on the West Coast. I think we can probably agree, probably in California somewhere. And so the people in Drugstore Cowboy are on the West Coast as well. But that's just sort of superficial connection. But really it's the fact that they're outsiders, very outside society, sort of struggling, they're sort of looking in and struggling to join sort of, you know, the mainstream, as it were. Or I guess in Drugstore Cowboy they're not really trying to get in. But that's something they're both
perhaps trying to avoid. In Drugstore Cowboy, it's about avoiding at all costs, trying to get in or join that. But whereas you get the sense with Enid's character, especially, that in some way she wants to. There's a wall there that she really desperately would like to break through.
Yes,
but she maybe just feels incapable of doing it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the other film that reminded me of, or brought to mind, is American Graffiti. George Lucas's, I think, first or second movie. Second movie, which is another sort of coming of age film set over one night in California, with all these high school students who go to that. It actually has a high school the bop in it, like in this one, and that film finishes with the sort of sun coming up. And this finishes with the sun coming up as well. That sort of lovely sort of pink, purple haze. I don't know, the light seemed quite sort of Californian. Maybe I got that wrong. But that was another film in where young characters are trying to sort of get to grips with their sort of adult sort of lives and what lies ahead.
Yeah, I think the thing about this film, I mean, I find like my relationship to it is quite interesting, because on so many levels I could find myself identifying with at least 2 or 3 of the characters quite a bit, and not necessarily, some of that, like definitely Seymour's character, who's kind of the obsessive kind of collector, and who has a bit of difficulty, social awkwardness, and he just kind of likes what he likes, and he likes kind of old records and
Yeah.
history and nostalgia and all these things that are tied up in his interests. And all of these characters find it really difficult on a certain level to um, relate to other people, don't they?
Yeah.
And Enid's character is very much like that. I could see a lot of her, like not to her perhaps extent, but I could see a lot of myself in her when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And that, the part of the crowd I was in was with those guys who were standing over in the corner going, "Oh, look at those, they're so
Yeah.
stupid."
Yeah.
Like that. So I could see, and on a certain level, watching the film kind of makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I can see myself, on some levels in some of these characters.
Yeah.
So
Definitely. Yeah.
I'm sure everyone can in a bit
Felt exactly the
identify
same.
with certain aspects of it.
Yeah.
So, but that's why I love it, because it has that, it has that tension between, there's these really funny moments where you can kind of laugh at these kind of weird characters and these, the situation, and you can kind of, on one hand, do that, it slightly makes you feel uncomfortable as well, because you kind of
Yes.
think, well, it's a bit mean, really, to be laughing at these people and making fun of them. And they're just normal people going about their business, or they have their own sort of issues and concerns and their, things in their life. And is it really right to be standing over in the corner going, look at them, oh, aren't they so stupid, kind of thing. So
Exactly. It's very clever the way it does that, because yeah, as you say, should we be judging, for, say, Seymour,
yeah.
like they are, just because he's got an unusual hobby? Essentially, that's why they're sort of laughing at him, and he sort of wears unfashionable clothes. But
Well,
then,
and that's a great thing about Seymour, because that's the thing about, I mean, here we're a couple of, middle-aged film nerds, aren't we, who sit here talking at length about all these old films that people have forgotten about. So on
absolutely,
a certain level,
we are
we can
Seymours.
identify. So, sorry.
We are Seymours. It's the Seymour
Yeah, we are.
Files.
We are, exactly. We are very, certainly I can see myself in Seymour in so many ways. But the thing about him too is that it's just that, it's like he's preserving history, and he's taking an interest in these obscure things that in society people just cast old things aside, and they just
Yeah,
go, oh, that doesn't have value anymore, it's all just a load of old crap. But
yeah,
then there's those people who love those things and want to preserve them and
yeah,
take care of them and nurture them, and it gives them comfort. And he's interested in history. And there's that great moment about when she finds the old poster from the chicken
oh
show.
yes,
That's a quite, offensive racist imagery that
yeah,
makes you uncomfortable. And of course, today in this sort of very corporatized kind of culture that we live in, all that stuff, the Disneys and and of the world, they try and sweep all that stuff under the carpet and just kind of make it go away and pretend that it didn't happen.
yeah,
And we have that lovely, the fact that, well, no, we shouldn't just pretend that this never happened, or, and it might make us uncomfortable, but it's important that we face these things and we look at these things and we understand that this what was a part of our culture and a part of our kind of identity, that people thought that this was okay,
yeah,
and companies and big businesses thought this was okay. And I think that that's quite an interesting point to make as well. And it's not to embrace those things and say that they're okay, but it's about facing up to the fact that
it
that
happened.
was there, and
Yeah,
we shouldn't just sweep it under the carpet and pretend it never happened, and or pretend it's not there.
yeah, yeah,
And I think so that was like a really nice sort of thread through that part of the film, and how it goes into her art class,
yes,
and that debate is there. So I think it's quite interesting,
oh yeah,
because Seymour's character is about, in a sense, and that's what collectors, what all collectors are really about, is that they're kind of preserving. They've picked out their little piece of history that they're interested in, and they're kind of saving it and holding on to it, and keeping it, and trying to get other people to remember it and be interested in it. So
Oh,
So that's a nice touch.
may I say that I think we should give a few, devote a little bit of time to Scarlett Johansson's character, because
Of
we've
course, absolutely.
slightly skirted over her, despite being this being her sort of breakthrough film, I
Mm,
think. So yeah, she starts off as this sort of cool, aloof, and cynical thing,
mm.
like her friend Enid, but she is more willing to conform. Is she? I guess you could look at her two ways. She's either more conformist in a sort of more negative way, or she's more sort of realistic and more sort of in touch with her feelings and also reality or something like that, and sort of more willing to deal with the sort of the practicalities of life, really.
Yeah, and I think that's a key difference, and that's what creates the tension between them. Because I guess I don't know if we touched on the fact that through the course of the film, because they're obviously quite close friends who've grown up in high school together and have been very kind of close and had their own little lived in their own little bubble together, kind of sitting outside of the rest of the high school and culture and but there's that once high school ends and they start to find that they have to start making decisions, there's a bit of a rift that develops between them,
Exactly.
and I think that's what it is that because as you said, Scarlett Johansson's character is perhaps more realistic and more grounded, and even though she can look at the outside world critically, which is a healthy thing. Which it's not a bad thing to be able to look at
No,
things and question them and be critical of them and say, "Oh, this is a bit naff and this is a bit, whatever." But she's also can function within that, and she can manage to hold a job without letting it interfere with her ability to get on with her coworkers and her
exactly.
manager and the
Without being rude to
customers and
everybody.
things. Yeah, and she does it so she can somehow assimilate and control those things and be able to function, whereas Enid can't do that. She doesn't seem willing to be able to compromise in
No,
her worldview at all, and
no.
that's what causes the kind of
She's a proper artist, basically, isn't she?
yeah, yes,
And I guess the sort of, in a way, the character Scarlett Johansson character is less sort of deep, not quite as deep a character. It's not
mm,
as Enid, the main character, but still,
no. There's that lovely scene when they're in the shopping mall, or they go like she goes shopping for dishes and things for their new apartment,
yes,
and she's kind of looking at these sort of really garish
gaudy
kind of
cups.
plastic cups and stuff, going, "Oh, I love these are great, we got to get some of these, oh, these are great." And you can kind of see where she's starting to just go into that consumer kind of I want to build a
Mentality.
house and home and have nice things and
Yeah,
pretty cups and plates and things like that, where Enid's like going, "Oh, this is all rubbish. Why do we care about this stuff?" And so there's that conflict there because,
yeah,
you know, and I love that moment.
yeah. No, it's good. I
And
guess
Seymour's character too, the Steve Buscemi character, is also someone who, on a certain level, he has that self awareness that he wants to be part of. He embraces this girlfriend who's someone who is just like she's quite a banal personality and not particularly interesting or anything, and she's like a real estate agent, and she's very shallow
yeah,
and not particularly interesting, but he kind of embraces that and kind of wants that. And he says, I don't want to be this kind of outsider who's all weird and doesn't fit in and stuff. I want to be, I want that and I want to be part of that. So you
yeah,
can see that struggle that he's having as well, because he
yeah,
doesn't
definitely,
really fit in, but he really kind of wants to, you
yeah.
know. So that's great as well.
Well, it's true. And one thing I should also mention is that at the beginning, it starts off with this amazing song, Jan
Oh
Pehe
yeah,
Chan Ho, sung by Mohammed Rafi, the great Bollywood playback singer. And it's an absolutely amazing song with this amazing dance in another film called Gumnaam from 1965. And but the rest of the music in the film is really good. It's got some Skip James. In fact, I remember when I saw it, I went out and bought a Skip James CD. I was
yeah.
so impressed by it.
Yeah, some
Buzz
of those great
Cox.
old. It's worth mentioning actually because I think the Steve Buscemi character is kind of a little bit of kind of Terry Zwigoff is um, before he made this, he made quite a great documentary about Robert Crumb
Oh
called
yes,
Crumb,
I've
which
watched that. Yeah,
is
great
one of
film.
my absolute favorite films and really brilliant. And obviously the Steve Buscemi character is a bit of a composite of Terry Zwigoff himself and perhaps a little bit of Robert Crumb as well, because I know Robert Crumb is quite an avid collector of old '78 records and things as well, isn't he? And
Yeah.
um, so I think that character is a little bit of a kind of a pastiche of their personalities and stuff as well, a little bit,
Yes.
which kind of is a nice makes a nice angle on it as well.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. So I would imagine at some point we'll talk about Crumb maybe on another episode if we talk about documentaries or talk about sort of biopics or something because that's a great favorite of mine. But Terry Zwigoff before he made this, and he went on to make some other fiction films, but he was quite a documentarian, wasn't he? And made
Yes.
several really
Well, he made
interesting.
another film with Daniel Clowes as well, Art
Hmm.
School Confidential, which I haven't
Yeah,
seen.
I haven't seen that actually. I've never had the opportunity to see that. I'd love to search that out. I might do that actually, just to see some of his later stuff. Because I must admit, like I really love this film and I really love Crumb, but I haven't really seen any of his later films. Um, so I think I might try to remedy that.
Yeah,
Actually,
there's
some of his
another
stuff.
Daniel Clowes film. I believe his other one of his other books was turned into a film called one second Wilson, which came out in 2017, which stars Woody Harrelson and Laura Dern.
Oh, brilliant!
So there's two other Daniel Clowes films. Yeah, but Terry Zwigoff also directed Art School Confidential, which was made 5 years after Ghost World
Oh, okay.
in 2006.
Brilliant. Well, definitely worth. I'll go and search those out. I think and sort of get caught up on the stuff he's been doing.
Yeah, he's
Was there
quite
anything
old.
else you wanted to say about this? Because I'm quite conscious we've
We have been
cracked the
rambling.
hour.
We have been rambling. Yeah, no.
But of course, fascinating rambling that our listeners are hanging off every word.
Well, one little detail that intrigued me about the film is the telephones, because nowadays we don't really use telephones so much. We just got our infernal gadget,
Yes.
and so Enid, she has a sort of phone that lights up, but it's a proper old phone, and then but the great phone that really sort of sums up Seymour in many ways is one of those old-fashioned sort of stick phones that they used to have in the 19...
With the detachable sort of thing that you hold up to your ear.
Exactly.
And the microphones on the stick on the thing.
Exactly.
And it's brilliant.
And he's sort of sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, or he's just he's sitting next to the phone, and it's just sort of emblematic of his character. Here he is stuck with this personality that's sort of just so utterly out of place and out of time. It's just hilarious. But quite tragic as well. Anyway, it's a really good film. Both films utterly terrific, and go and watch them, everybody.
So we should have, so how did you watch Ghost World so we can let our
Ghost World I watched on Amazon Prime, which you can watch for free with ads. They're like little tiny sort of 20-second
the
ads.
freebie thing, yeah. It's actually not so bad. I've watched a couple. As a matter of fact, when we did Drugstore Cowboy, that's how I watched it. It was on the Freevee thing, and they don't interrupt it very much, do they? At least they didn't on that one.
No, it wasn't too many, and they were quite quick as well.
They're just like a little quick sort of 30-second ad, and then they go back to the film, so it's not that bad. I would imagine it might get worse as it goes on, but for the time being. So that's how you saw it. I actually, I do have, people who are watching the video version of this will see that I have huge boxes and piles and piles of physical media of different types stacked up behind me and to all sides of me and stuff. There is a Ghost World DVD somewhere in this catastrophe. But I didn't bother to try and dig it out because it's actually available on the BFI player without ads. But obviously, it's a subscription-based
which I haven't signed up to yet.
But it is available on the BFI player. So, I would highly recommend people in the UK to go and subscribe to the BFI player because there is a veritable world of wonders there for you to explore. And it's not very expensive either. It's only sort of like 30-40 pounds for a year. So go on and get out there and subscribe. And Ghost World's on there as well as hundreds of other really great films.
Last thing I was going to say is that those telephones that Seymour had, it's called a candlestick telephone.
Right, brilliant. Well, yeah, that makes sense.
Should you want to know?
Very much candlesticky. Candlestick-like.
There you go.
Brilliant. Okay, should we? I guess we should probably wrap it up because we're getting up there now, and we've probably long surpassed the average commute length now. So
yeah, we'll be on the way home.
Yeah, exactly.
When's it going to finish?
The rest on the way home, folks. But anyway, we hope that you've stuck with us. But anyway, so please check out Long Good Friday and Ghost World. And I'll quickly mention to come out and find us on social media. Of course, I'm obliged to mention we're on Twitter at FilmSwapUK. We're also on Instagram and TikTok, the same at FilmSwapUK. And you can also find us on Facebook, Film Swap the Podcast.
Yes.
There's a group there that you can come join, and please do come and find us and let's talk some film and tell us what you think about Ghost World and Bob Hoskins and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But most importantly, I'd like to urge listeners to come and find us on YouTube. And you can find us on YouTube at FilmSwap_podcast. And if you do that, aside from video versions of the podcast that you can watch or listen to there, we will also be doing regular factoids, Film Swap factoids, which are little short videos that we've been making just to give you some little fascinating and fun film facts. And they're all, you'll see Jonathan on there giving us those facts. And also, we've got other plans. We've got other amazing prizes and surprises that will be coming up on our YouTube channel in the future. Really amazing plans. They're so great that I haven't quite discussed them fully with Jonathan yet.
I have no idea what these plans are.
But they are coming. We've got lots of big plans. So please come find us on YouTube and subscribe, because you don't want to miss out on anything.
Definitely
I know
not.
That for sure, that you are not going to want to miss any of the fun. So come and subscribe, and we'll let you know when things are happening, so you can be the first to feast upon the magnificence. So on that note, listeners, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back very, very soon. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Yep. Okay, bye.